You think you can just say no and walk away like none of this matters. Your brother has worked too hard for you to ruin it with your selfishness. Sign the damn papers, Lauren, or I swear this family will finally see you for the burden you've always been. Hi, my name is Lauren Bennett. I am 31 years old. My father's voice still echoed in my head 2 days later as I sat at my kitchen table staring at the stack of printed pages I had pulled from the family's shared phone account portal. I had only logged in because Ethan kept missing my calls about a joint account issue I thought we needed to fix. What I found instead made my stomach twist so hard I had to push my coffee away. The call log showed dozens of late-night conversations between my father and the bank's private client line. The timestamps lined up perfectly with large transfers that had moved out of the family investment account my grandmother had set up years ago. The money wasn't going to any of the legitimate businesses on file. It was disappearing into a shell my brother had registered under a name I had never heard, until that moment, Summit Peak Holdings. Ethan's private slush fund, hidden in plain sight, while the rest of us were told the family was tightening its belt. I printed the logs 3 times before I believed what I was seeing. Every page felt heavier than the last. My hand shook so badly, the paper rattled against the table. This wasn't the first time money had moved without my knowledge, but it was the first time I had proof that my father and Diane, my stepmother, had coordinated it with Ethan while smiling at Sunday dinners and telling me I was too sensitive about finances. I called my business partner, Marcus Rivera, before I could talk myself out of it. Marcus had helped me build my consulting firm from a one-woman operation into something stable enough that I finally stopped checking my bank app every morning. He answered on the second ring voice, already alert, even though it was barely 7. Lauren, you sound like someone died. Worse, I said. I think my family just robbed me in slow motion. I read him the dates and amounts. Marcus went quiet for a long second. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted into the careful, precise way he used when a client's books didn't add up. Send me the PDFs. I'll run them through the pattern software we use for fraud cases. But Lauren, if this is what it looks like, you need a lawyer who actually understands family trusts before you confront anyone. I already knew that. I just hadn't wanted to say the word lawyer out loud yet. It made everything feel too real, too final. That afternoon, I drove to Rebecca Shaw's office on the edge of downtown. Rebecca was the only attorney I trusted after she had helped me structure my consulting contracts 2 years earlier. She read the logs once, then again, her mouth tightening at the corners. They didn't even try to hide the pattern, she said quietly. The transfers spike right after your grandmother's account matured. Your father and Diane have been signing as co-trustees. Ethan's shell company received every dollar. This isn't sloppy. It's deliberate. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not shock anymore. Something sharper? Can I stop it? Rebecca leaned back in her chair. Legally, maybe. But families like this don't usually stop when you ask nicely. They escalate. If you push, they will try to make you the problem. Gaslighting, isolation. Whatever works. Are you ready for that? I thought about the 3 lines my father had thrown at me in my own living room. I thought about Diane's careful silences at every holiday, the way she always redirected any conversation about money toward how lucky I was to have a roof over my head. I thought about Ethan's smug texts about his big break that never seemed to require actual work. "I'm ready," I said. Rebecca nodded once. Then we start documenting everything. And we do not tip our hand until we have leverage they can't spin away. I left her office with a folder of next steps and a headache that felt like it had settled behind my eyes for good. On the drive home, I kept checking my rearview mirror like someone might be following me. That was new. Paranoia wasn't my usual style, but nothing about the last 48 hours felt usual. 2 weeks later, the invitation arrived in my email. Subject line, Family Reset. Summit Lodge, Aspen. 1 week, no excuses. Diane had written it. My father had probably dictated the no excuses part. The message was warm on the surface, full of words like healing and reconnecting and putting the past behind us. I almost laughed. The past they wanted to bury was currently sitting in a locked drawer in my apartment, printed and highlighted. Marcus read the email over my shoulder at the office. "This is a trap?" "Obviously," I said. "But if I don't go, they'll say I'm the one refusing to fix things. They'll use it against me later." He studied me for a moment. "Then don't go alone. I'll come with you as your plus one. We'll say it's a work trip and I needed the mountain air. They can't complain about me being there if we frame it as business." I almost said no. Bringing Marcus felt like admitting I needed backup against my own family. But the alternative was walking into that lodge with nothing but printed phone logs and a stomach full of dread. "Fine," I said. "But we tell Rebecca first. And we document every single conversation while we're there." Marcus gave me a small, grim smile. Already planning the shared note doc. The night before we left, I sat on my couch with the phone logs spread across the coffee table again. I traced the dates with one finger. Every transfer had happened while I was working late or traveling for client meetings. While I was building something of my own, they had been quietly emptying the one thing my grandmother had left that was supposed to be mine. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Ethan, Dad says you're finally coming to Aspen." "Good. We need to talk about the future, like adults." I didn't answer. I just screenshotted it and added it to the folder. Outside, the city lights blurred through the window. Inside, the papers on my table felt like they were breathing. The family I had spent 31 years trying to belong to had already decided I didn't. They just hadn't told me yet. I folded the top page and slid it back into the folder. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped sometime between Rebecca's office and Marcus offering to come with me. They wanted a family reset. I was going to give them one, but not the kind they expected. The drive up to Aspen felt longer than the miles on the odometer suggested, even with Marcus riding shotgun and filling the silence with the kind of steady, low-key observations that kept my hands from gripping the wheel too hard. We had barely crossed the state line when I told him the rest of what Rebecca had said about the trust language and how easily my father and Diane could spin any pushback as me being difficult. Marcus just nodded once the way he did, when a client's numbers were about to blow up a deal, and said we would handle it one conversation at a time. We pulled into the circular driveway of Summit Lodge as the last light drained from the sky. Richard stood on the wide porch with his arms folded across his chest like he was already bracing for a fight. Diane waited beside him, that tight, pleasant smile she wore whenever she wanted to look reasonable in front of other people. Ethan leaned against the railing a few steps away, scrolling on his phone like none of this involved him. Lauren, Richard said as I stepped out of the car. The single word carried the weight of every argument we had never finished. You brought company. Marcus Rivera? I answered, keeping my voice even. He's helping me with a client project that happens to overlap with the week. I figured the mountain air might help us both focus. Diane's smile didn't move, but her eyes flicked to Marcus and back to me with a quick, assessing sharpness. How thoughtful. We were hoping for family time, but I suppose we can make room. She turned toward the door without waiting for an answer. Dinner's in an hour. Ethan, show your sister and her colleague to their rooms. Ethan pushed off the railing and gave me a lazy half smile that didn't reach his eyes. Upstairs, second and third doors on the left. Try not to snoop through the family files while you're settling in. The jab landed exactly where he meant it to. I felt Marcus shift beside me, but I kept walking. Wouldn't dream of it, I said over my shoulder. The lodge was all warm wood and oversized windows that looked out over dark pines already heavy with early snow. My room was simple and clean. Marcus's was right next door. I closed my door, set my bag on the bed, and pulled the printed phone logs from the inner pocket of my jacket. I had brought them because leaving them at home felt like leaving evidence unprotected. I folded them once and slid them under the mattress, then sat on the edge of the bed and let myself breathe for the first time since we had arrived. Dinner started quiet and stayed that way for exactly 8 minutes. Richard sat at the head of the long table, carving into his steak with deliberate, controlled cuts. Diane passed the wine and kept refilling Ethan's glass while barely touching her own. Marcus and I sat across from them, the empty chairs on either side of us, making the table feel larger than it was. So, Diane said, finally setting the bottle down with a soft click. How is the consulting business these days? Lauren still keeping you too busy for family? It's steady, I said. Marcus and I just closed a project that should carry us through the next quarter. Ethan snorted into his glass. Must be nice to have that kind of flexibility. Some of us are actually trying to build something that lasts instead of renting out advice by the hour. Richard didn't look up from his plate. Your brother has a real opportunity in front of him. Summit Peak could change the trajectory for all of us if it gets the right backing. Family supports, family when it matters. I set my fork down. The sound was small but deliberate. What kind of backing are we talking about exactly? Diane's smile sharpened at the edges. The kind that requires signatures from people who actually understand loyalty. Your father and I have already done our part. We were hoping you would do yours without turning it into another one of your dramatic scenes. Marcus stayed quiet beside me, but I felt the shift in his posture. He was listening the way he listened to hostile board meetings. I kept my voice level. If this is about moving money from the trust, I already know it happened. I saw the logs. The table went still. Richard's knife paused halfway through another cut. Ethan's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Diane was the first to recover her expression, smoothing into something almost pitying. Oh, sweetheart, she said softly. You always did have a talent for finding problems where there aren't any. Those transfers were necessary adjustments. Your grandmother's money was sitting idle while Ethan's company needed seed capital. We didn't steal from you. We invested in the future. Without telling me, I said. Without my consent? That's not investment? That's theft dressed up as family duty. Richard finally looked at me. The contempt in his eyes was cold and familiar. You were never going to do anything useful with it anyway. You've spent your whole life proving you can't be trusted with real responsibility. Ethan has vision. He has drive. You have spreadsheets and a persecution complex. The words hit harder than I expected, even though I had heard versions of them before. I felt the old automatic urge to shrink to apologize for making the table uncomfortable. I let it rise and then let it pass without acting on it. Marcus spoke for the first time, his tone calm and professional. With respect, sir, if those transfers violated the trust terms, it doesn't matter what the intention was. It matters what the documents say. Diane turned her full attention on him like he had just become the real problem. This is a family matter, Mr. Rivera. Lauren knows how we handle things when outsiders aren't involved. I'm not an outsider, I said. I'm the beneficiary whose name is on the original paperwork, and I'm done pretending this is normal. Ethan pushed his chair back with a scrape that echoed off the high ceiling. You know what your problem is, Lauren. You've always been jealous that Dad and Diane actually believe in me. You show up here with your little printouts and your corporate friend like you're building a case instead of trying to fix things. Maybe if you spent half as much energy supporting this family as you do auditing it, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I stood up slowly. The movement felt deliberate, controlled. I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here because you invited me. And now I'm leaving the table before anyone says something they can't walk back. I walked out of the dining room without looking at any of them. Marcus followed a moment later. We didn't speak until we reached the upstairs hallway. You okay? He asked quietly. No, I said. But I'm not done either. I waited until the house had gone quiet. Around midnight, I slipped out of my room and moved through the dark hallway toward the small office I had noticed earlier off the main living area. The door was unlocked. I closed it behind me and turned on the small desk lamp. The top drawer held the usual lodge paperwork. The second drawer was locked. I tried the key from the desk set and felt it turn. Inside were 3 folders. One had Ethan's name on it. The second had mine. The third was unmarked. I opened the unmarked one first. Bank statements. Not the phone logs this time. Actual monthly summaries from the trust account printed and highlighted in Diane's precise handwriting. The transfers were there, but so were additional movements I hadn't seen before, smaller amounts moving from Ethan's shell into a personal account Diane controlled, labeled only with dates and the word reimbursement. The numbers added up to more than the original trust balance. They had been skimming on top of the theft, using my grandmother's money to pad their own pockets while telling me the family was struggling. My hands went cold. I took photos with my phone, careful to keep the flash off. I was sliding the folder back into place when the office door opened behind me. Diane stood in the doorway in a silk robe, her hair pulled back, her expression unreadable in the low light. Looking for something, she asked. Her voice was soft, almost gentle. That made it worse. I straightened slowly. I found it. She stepped inside and closed the door. You always were the curious one. It's going to get you in trouble one of these days. I already am in trouble, I said. You and Dad took money that wasn't yours and tried to make me complicit. Now you're skimming on top of it. Why? Diane tilted her head like she was considering how much truth to give me. Because Ethan needed more than the trust could provide. Because your father and I have carried this family for decades while you built your little independent life and judged us for it. Because sometimes the people who actually keep things running have to make hard choices the idealists never understand. She moved closer. I could smell her perfume, the same one she had worn at every holiday dinner where she had smiled and passed the potatoes and told me I was looking tired. "You have two options, Lauren," she said. "You can sign the paperwork your father brought, let Ethan access the remaining capital he needs, and we all move forward like a family. Or you can keep digging, keep causing scenes, and watch us protect ourselves the only way we know how. I promise you won't like the second option." I held up my phone, the screen still glowing with the photos of the statements. "I already have the proof." Diane smiled, small and cold. "Proof of what? Family helping family during a difficult time. A few accounting adjustments. You think a judge or a bank is going to care about hurt feelings between relatives? Grow up." She turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind her. I stood in the quiet office with the phone in my hand and the folder still half open on the desk. My heart was hammering, but my mind felt strangely clear. They had known I might find something. That was why they had brought me here. Not for a reset. For a controlled environment where they could pressure me into compliance or paint me as unstable if I pushed back. I closed the folders, turned off the lamp, and stepped back into the hallway. The house was silent again, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like it was waiting. Back in my room, I texted Rebecca the photos with a single line. They escalated. "I have more now. Call me in the morning." Then I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the dark window until the first gray light started to touch the pines outside. My phone buzzed at 6:17 a.m. Rebecca's name lit the screen. I answered before the second ring. "Lauren," she said, and her voice was tight in a way I had never heard from her before. "I need you to listen carefully. The bank flagged the trust account overnight for a series of irregular transfers. They're initiating an internal review, and they've already frozen the remaining balance pending documentation. They also reached out to the IRS fraud line because the pattern triggered their automated system. Someone is going to want to talk to all of you within the next 48 hours. I closed my eyes. The chaos I had felt building since the phone logs first printed had finally broken through the surface. "They're going to blame me," I said. "Probably," Rebecca answered. "That's why you need to get your documentation in order and stay calm. Do not sign anything. Do not let them isolate you from Marcus or from me. And Lauren, yeah, if they try to make this about your mental state or your dramatic scenes, we document that too. This just became bigger than family drama. The authorities are already involved, whether anyone likes it or not." I ended the call and set the phone on the nightstand. Outside the window, the mountain looked peaceful in the early light. Inside the lodge, I could already hear movement downstairs. Voices, footsteps, the sound of someone starting coffee. They had wanted a family reset. Now the reset was coming from the outside, and none of us were going to walk away from it unchanged. I stood up, pulled on a sweater, and opened my door. The day was just beginning, and the ground underneath everything I had thought was solid had already started to shift. The morning light filtering through the lodge windows felt too bright for what was already happening downstairs. I could hear voices before I reached the bottom step. Richard's low clipped tone, Diane's sharper replies, Ethan's rising panic. Marcus was already in the kitchen when I walked in, standing near the counter with a mug he hadn't touched. He gave me a small nod that said he had heard enough to know the ground had shifted overnight. Richard turned the second I entered the room. His face was flushed, the careful control from last night already cracking. You went to the bank. You actually called them and told them to freeze everything. Diane stood beside him, arms crossed the silk robe, replaced by a crisp sweater and the same tight expression she had worn in the office. We received the call at 5 this morning. They said an anonymous tip triggered a compliance review. Anonymous. How convenient for you. Ethan was pacing near the window phone in his hand, like it might ring with better news if he stared at it long enough. They're looking at Summit Peak too. My accounts. Everything. Do you have any idea what you've done? I stayed near the doorway, Marcus just behind my shoulder. I didn't call the bank, but I did find the statements you left in the desk. The one showing Diane pulling extra money out after the initial transfers. I sent photos to my lawyer. She must have started the process on her end. The room went quiet for half a second, then exploded into overlapping voices. Richard slammed his hand on the counter. You had no right to go through our things. That was private family business. Private. I kept my voice steady, even as the chaos swirled. You used my name on documents without telling me. You drained an account that was supposed to be mine and funneled it into Ethan's shell company while Diane skimmed off the top. That stopped being private the moment you made me the fallback signature. Diane stepped forward, her voice dropping into the soft, reasonable tone she used when she wanted to sound like the only adult in the room. Lauren, you are overreacting again. Families move money around all the time. Your father and I were protecting the legacy. Ethan has real potential. You've always been too wrapped up in your own little world to see the bigger picture. Marcus spoke up calm but firm. The bigger picture includes federal reporting requirements when trust funds are moved without beneficiary consent. That's not family discretion. That's a compliance issue now. Ethan stopped pacing and pointed at me, his face red. You did this on purpose. You've been waiting for a chance to punish us because you were never the favorite. Well, congratulations. You just blew up the entire family over some old paperwork. The words landed like they were meant to make me the villain, the jealous one, the problem. I felt the old sting, the automatic pull to defend myself or shrink. I let it pass. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened the photos of the highlighted statements. I have the dates, the amounts, and the routing. Rebecca has copies. So does the bank now. You can keep telling yourselves this was about legacy and potential. The paperwork says something different. Richard's jaw worked for a moment before he spoke. If you push this, the IRS will come after all of us. Is that what you want? To watch your own family get dragged through audits and penalties because you couldn't just sign what we asked. Diane added quieter, but no less sharp. We raised you. We gave you a home when your mother couldn't. This is how you repay us? By turning us into criminals in our own house? I looked at her directly. You didn't raise me to be a signature on demand. And you didn't give me a home. You gave me a seat at the table as long as I stayed quiet and useful. I'm done being useful. My phone rang in my hand. Rebecca's name. I answered and put it on speaker without asking permission. Lauren, I have? Victor Hale on the line with me, Rebecca said. Victor was the forensic accountant she had brought in overnight. His voice came through steady and precise. The bank has confirmed the freeze. They're treating this as potential wire fraud and trust violation. Because you disclosed voluntarily with documentation, you're positioned as the cooperating party. The remaining assets in the trust and any traceable transfers are now under review for restitution. If the family wants to avoid criminal referral, they'll need to cooperate with returning the principal plus documented penalties. Richard went pale. Diane's composed mask finally slipped. Her mouth tightened into a thin line. Ethan sat down hard on one of the stools, like the air had left the room. Victor continued. There's also the matter of the additional withdrawals labeled as reimbursements. Those appear to have gone into a personal account controlled by Diane Bennett. That layer complicates things for everyone involved. Diane's head snapped toward Richard. For the first time, the united front cracked in front of me. I told you we should have moved that money sooner. Richard didn't answer her. He was staring at the phone like it had personally betrayed him. Rebecca spoke again. Lauren, you have leverage here. The bank and the reviewing agents will listen to the person who brought the documentation forward. But you need to decide how far you want to take this. I looked around the room at the father who had stood in my living room and called me a burden, at the stepmother who had smiled through every holiday while moving money that wasn't hers, at the brother who had treated my inheritance like it was his birthright. The chaos in the room felt loud and small at the same time. I want the original amount restored to a trust in my grandmother's name, I said. I want the penalties and fees covered by the remaining family assets. And I want a legal separation, no more shared accounts, no more pressure, no more pretending we're a family that fixes things together. Ethan let out a short, bitter laugh. You're really going to destroy everything over this, I met his eyes. You already destroyed it. I'm just refusing to keep paying for the cleanup. Richard finally spoke, his voice rough. If we do this your way, you walk away with the money, and we're left with nothing but legal bills and ruined credit. You left me with nothing but printed logs and the choice to stay silent or speak up, I answered. I chose to speak up. Diane turned away first. She walked to the window and stared out at the pines like the view might offer a different ending. Richard stayed where he was, shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen. Ethan kept his head down, texting someone who probably couldn't save him. Rebecca's voice came through the speaker again. Lauren, Victor, and I can handle the paperwork from here. The redirection can be structured quietly through the compliance process, no public spectacle, if everyone cooperates. The remaining liquid assets will move into a new trust vehicle tied to your work. It won't erase what happened, but it will close the loop. I ended the call after agreeing to send the final documentation that afternoon. The room felt smaller once the voices on the phone were gone. Marcus touched my arm lightly. You ready to go? I nodded. Yeah, I'm done here. I looked at Richard one last time. This is the last conversation we're going to have. I'm changing my number. I'm blocking the accounts. If any of you try to contact me again, it goes straight to Rebecca and the investigators. You wanted me to sign papers that would have chained me to your choices. I'm signing something different now, my own freedom. Diane didn't turn around. Richard didn't argue. Ethan stayed silent. Marcus and I walked out of the lodge without another word. The drive down the mountain was quiet at first, the kind of quiet that comes after something irreversible has happened. Halfway back, I pulled over at a scenic pullout and let myself cry for exactly 2 minutes, short, sharp sobs that felt like they had been waiting since the first phone log printed. Then I wiped my face, started the car again, and kept driving. 3 months later, the legal pieces had settled into something almost clean. The bank and the reviewing agents had accepted the voluntary restitution path. The original trust amount, plus penalties drawn from the remaining family holdings, had been redirected into a new structure. Rebecca and Victor helped create a quiet vehicle that supported the consulting work I was expanding and carried my grandmother's name on the paperwork. It wasn't revenge in the dramatic sense. It was just the money finally landing where it was supposed to have been, all along without my father's or Diane's signatures attached. Ethan's shell company collapsed under the scrutiny. He lost the penthouse-level lifestyle he had built on borrowed capital. Richard and Diane downsized fast, selling the lodge, liquidating what they could before the remaining liens hit. I heard through a distant relative that they had moved to a smaller place in another state. I didn't ask for details. I changed my number the day we left Aspen. I blocked every contact from the old family account. Sophia Grant, a friend from my early consulting days, who had become something steadier than I realized, started joining Marcus and me for monthly dinners. She didn't ask for explanations. She just showed up with wine and let me talk when I needed to, and sit in silence when I didn't. Marcus remained my business partner, and the person who had seen the worst of it without flinching. Rebecca and Victor stayed on retainer for anything that still needed untangling. They weren't replacements. They were the people who had chosen to stand in the room when it mattered. Some nights I still felt the loss, like a missing tooth sharp. At first, then a dull ache I noticed at odd moments. The family I had been born into was gone. Not dramatically, not with one final explosion, but with the quiet finality of blocked numbers and redirected assets. I didn't mourn the people they had become. I mourned the version of belonging I had kept hoping for, even after the evidence said it was never coming. But the freedom on the other side of that loss was real. I woke up without checking my phone for messages that would never arrive. I made decisions about my company without calculating how they might affect people who had already decided I was disposable. I built routines with people who showed up because they wanted to, not because blood or guilt required it. Chosen family doesn't come with hidden transfers or ultimatums. It doesn't demand signatures on documents you never saw. It doesn't call you a burden for refusing to be erased. It simply stays when the chaos hits and helps you pick up what's left without keeping score. I still have the printed phone logs in a locked drawer. Not because I need the proof anymore. Because they remind me exactly how far they were willing to go and exactly where I finally stopped letting them. Thank you for listening to my story. If your family ever asked you to sign away your future while calling it love, or moved money in silence, and then blamed you for noticing how far is too far, before you choose yourself instead,